Dick, we're just going to chat. I don't have a script. I don't have a list of questions. So just let's start with this. Tell us who you are and when and where you were born.
Well, I'm Richard Dodge. Richard Allen Dodge. The Allen being named after Shorty Landis, who was Allen Landis. Born in Pleasant Lake, June 2nd, 1930.
Where were you born in Pleasant Lake?
I don't know who lives there now. It was directly across the street from where Dean Wolfe lived, to the east.
That little corner house?
Corner house there.
My parents lived there.
They did?
Yep, back in the 30s.
Well, we moved from there in 1933 to the farm.
Wouldn't have been long after that they lived there.
To the farm. Bennett's lived next door. Paul Bennett, who was the first president of the Pleasant Lake Lions Club.
He was in my father's high school class in
Was he?
1922.
Paul Bennett, yes.
Now, who were your parents?
Howard and Arlene. Howard grew up on a farm north of Pleasant Lake. My mother, Arlene, grew up in Salem Township, graduated from Salem High School. My dad went to a one-room school that was about a mile from where they lived, where the farm was. It was, at one time, County Road 300, which dead ends into 150, went all the way through to Waymart Road. And my folks lived on that road, which was my grandfather Dodge. There was sinkholes back there in that road, and every year the road would disappear, and so he'd fix the road, and they finally ended up closing it. It was early, back in the 1930s.
And what did they do for a living?
Farmers, farmed. My grandfather, the farm that we ended up owning was 100 acres. Prior to that, 50 acres of it belonged to my grandfather, and 50 acres belonged to my grandmother, who was a Hendrickson. Her name was Hendrickson, and her family owned the front 50 acres, and my grandfather's family owned the back 50 acres.
Now, your father didn't just always farm.
No. He and said Allen Landis formed a partnership in 1926 and opened the shop there in Pleasant Lake, which they done sheet metal work, done fabricated a lot of standing seam metal roofing, installed old big cast iron coal-fired furnaces.
Where was the shop located?
Where the firehouse is now. That was Landis and Dodge. They operated that until 1941 when the war came, and they no longer could get material, couldn't get metal and furnaces and those sort of things, so they closed the shop. Shorty Landis took over Al Schaefer's blacksmith shop, and he ran that, and my dad went to work on construction and government projects.
You grew up in the county then, outside of the town.
Yes. We moved to the farm, I was 3 years old, which is 2.5 miles north of Pleasant Lake.
And you went to school in Pleasant Lake.
Yes.
How'd you get back?
12 years.
How'd you get back and forth?
Rode this bus. My original bus driver was Fay Walsh. Fay Walsh was related somehow to the Harpins. I can't remember just for sure quite how that was, but He was my first bus driver, and then Carl Waymeyer became my bus driver. And Carl drove the bus probably many, many years.
Pleasant Lake School. Tell me about going to school there. What it was like.
I can remember some of the things that went on when we first started first grade there. Of course, we were getting acquainted with a few new kids that I didn't know before, and we had to kind of figure out who liked who and who didn't, you know, and we had buddies and kind of got together as, you know, groups, I guess. In first grade, lady by the name of Olivia Watkins was my first grade teacher. Remember Olivia? She was a nice lady, and of course went through 12 grades. During the war, I would have started in 1936 school. During the war, my father was gone, so I had the chores to do at home. We had cows to milk, hogs to feed, chickens to feed, and big garden to tend, so forth. So a lot of that was what I had to do. That was, which I did. I milked cows for 4 years while I was going to high school. And playing sports at school meant that I had to stay for practice after school, so there was no way to get home, so I had to walk home. And because the bus, of course, had already gone. So then when I get home, I have to milk them cows at night. And then I have to get up in the morning and milk the cows before I went to school. And as soon as I got done with school, I left.
Now, when you say you played sports in school, what did you do?
Baseball, basketball. That was about all we had at the time. I don't recall that we had any track. I don't remember that or any track. It was baseball and basketball.
You were a cheerleader one year.
Yes.
How'd that come about?
Senior year, I decided I didn't want to play basketball anymore, and so I joined Janice Julian and Joyce Cankamp, two nice-looking girls, and became a cheerleader. And it was surprising. It seemed to be like it was more fun than playing basketball.
Now, when you were in high school in Pleasant Lake, you were busy at the farm, but were there social events you got to attend around Pleasant Lake?
Oh, not really. There was not a lot of social events going on in Pleasant Lake. There was a lot of businesses in town at that time. I think it was, like 20-some businesses downtown.
You recall what businesses you frequented?
Well, I remember, of course, the Ransburg store,
Sure.
the Ransburg Brothers. Another one of those. There was, of course, a couple of grocery stores. Gilbert had the grocery store prior to Benny Everett's.
Oh, yeah.
Ray and Hazel Gilbert had the grocery store there on the corner. There was the Chevrolet garage, Fuller's Chevrolet garage. There was a meat market, a barber shop, the grocery store uptown. on the north side of the street. I don't remember. I know Ted August. I remember him being there, but I don't know who was there prior to him. Of course, the post office was there. Drugstore. There was.
Who had the drugstore then, do you recall?
Russell Stutler, whose son Robert Stutler was in my class in school. And Russell had the drugstore. Don't remember when that changed, but it was bought out by some other people. I can't remember their name.
Was Imhoff's grocery store there?
Imhoff. Imhoff had a grocery store, yes.
Kind of a dry goods store, as I recall.
Yes. Imhoff's. There was a lumber yard, hardware, Matson's Hardware, and the lumber yard was Lions, Ormsby Lions had the lumber yard, yeah.
Now, when you graduated from high school, I understand you took off. What was that about?
Graduated school, and Herb Kaiser and I left Angola hitchhiking for the West Coast, headed for Oregon.
Why Oregon?
We made it to Oregon. Well, interesting thing, Fay Walsh, who was my school bus driver, had moved to Oregon, and he owned a sawmill operation in Oregon. He had been there a while, and I don't know, we were somehow in contact with him, and thought we'd go out there and work in the sawmill or the logging business or something, just for a new experience. So that's where we headed for. We ended up, and they lived in a little town in Oregon. I can't remember now the name. Anyhow, we arrived there finally after a few days of travel, hitchhiking, rode a freight train, and we arrived in Oregon, and it had been raining for 40 days, and it was nothing but mud and flood. And there was no timber being harvested. Everything was cut down. It was just because it was the weather. So we thought, well, there's nothing to do here. I guess we'll go to San Francisco. So we hitchhiked to San Francisco and picked up some odd jobs along the way, picking strawberries, and we worked for a guy that done little maintenance jobs around town, worked for him for a while, and then we went on to San Francisco, and we was going to join the Merchant Marine. That was our plan. We get to San Francisco and went to the Union Hall. You have to go to the Merchant Marine Union Hall, and they were booked. They were old-time merchant mariners sitting there waiting for a job. They had more people than they had jobs, and so we didn't do any good there. And somebody said, well, there's a fishing fleet going out of Seattle to Alaska that does commercial fishing, and all the commercial fishermen from the Seattle area go to Alaska, and so they hired new people. So we headed back for Seattle. On our way back to Seattle, we got picked up by the Oregon Highway Patrol, hitchhiking north, and said, we've got a little problem with some flooding on the Columbia River. Portland's underwater, and we need some volunteers to work on the sandbag crew. So we ended up working on sandbagging the Columbia River. As I recall, it was a couple of days. Spent a little time around Portland. Finally got across the river on the railroad bridge, which was the only thing that was still left. Everything else was washed out. Got to Seattle, and the salmon fishing fleet had all left a week prior before we got there. So they were all gone. So here we are in Seattle. What are we going to do now? And we talked about it a little bit and thought, well, let's go to Mexico, see what's down there. So we left out of Seattle, headed towards Spokane, Washington, and picked up a ride with a guy, and he was from Wyoming, and he said, he told us about this guy that had a ranch in Wyoming. And he said he hires a lot of extra help in the summertime. Well, that sounded kind of interesting, so we headed for Wyoming and arrived in Rock River, Wyoming on a Sunday night and went out to see the guy at this ranch. And
What year would that have been?
for 1948.
Yeah.
48. And we went out to the ranch on a Sunday night. I can still recall knocking on the door, and we had to walk in about 2 miles from the highway to the ranch. And he said, you guys had anything to eat? And I said, no, we haven't eaten today yet. He said, well, go down to the bunkhouse. He said, they're fixing dinner for the guys. He said, you get down there and get a bed. He said, I'll talk to you in the morning. So we hired on the next morning as ranch hands. Cowboys. We became cowboys. And I spent the month of June, July, August, September, and October and on that ranch in Wyoming, herding cattle and making hay and doing all those things that cowboys do.
You came and decided to come back to...
I got $150 a month in room and board.
All right.
And there was no place to spend it, so when I come home, I had money. And I rode the freight train, a freight train all the way from Laramie, Wyoming to Pleasant Lake with 2 carload of sheep that were consigned to James Ferris. Jim Ferris had a farm out on across from where you live, out on the Bell Fountain Road, right?
Yeah.
And he bought lambs in Wyoming, and they fed them and fattened them out and then sold them. They had a stockyard in Pleasant Lake at the time. They came into Pleasant Lake on the railroad, unloaded them at the stockyard, and drove this whole herd of sheep, how many ever there was, I don't know, all the way down Main Street out to the Ferris farm. Put them in the barn.
Didn't lose any of them on the way.
Not that I recall. But we did travel down the railroad, rode in the caboose, and in Omaha they stopped and unloaded all the sheep and fed and watered them and put them back on the train. And from there we went to Chicago, then to Pleasant Lake.
Now, when you got back, what did you do?
Went to work for Cecil Lepley on the farm. Cecil had a farm out on 500 South where Sturry lives now. That was Cecil. That was a Lepley farm, and I worked for Cecil through the winter feeding livestock. He had beef cattle. Whole barn, he had barns full of them. I don't know how many, there was a lot of them, but he needed help, so I worked for Cecil.
Where were you living at the time?
At home.
Yeah. And then what did you do?
Well, I also worked the next summer for Ferris, for Jim Ferris. He had a hay baler, which was a 3-man crew, a tractor driver and 2 men on the baler. I drove the tractor, and Bob and Max Ferris ran the baler, or handled the baler, and did that the next summer, and that would have been 49. 50, I think that was the same thing. I was just done farm labor around in the community. 1950 left and went to the Air Force.
How long were you in the Air Force?
4 years.
What did you do?
I went, there were actually 3 of us, Jerry Van Wagner and H.E. Dowell from Angola, and I all went to Indianapolis and enlisted in the Air Force. That was latter part of December. We were given a 3-day pass over Christmas and had to report to the Air Force Base. I can't think of the name of the base now in San Antonio, Texas. We were there for a week, and the conditions were pretty crowded. They had 120,000 men on the base and accommodations for 80,000. They had people everywhere, and they didn't know what to do with all of them, so we finally got issued uniforms, and they shipped us out to Shepherd Air Force Base at Wichita Falls for basic training. Went through basic training, 14-week course in 7 weeks. They put us through in 7 weeks. Shipped out to Tacoma, Washington, to an Air Force Base in Tacoma, McChord Air Force Base. And at McChord, I was assigned to base maintenance squadron for 4 months. Was then got assigned to a technical school in Chanute Field, Illinois, and came back and went through airframe repair school at Chanute. That was a 14-week course. Returned to McChord and was assigned to a fighter squadron as an assistant crew chief on a fighter crew, ground crewman, and worked as an assistant for a year, and then got promoted to a crew chief position, which was I was responsible for all the maintenance, record keeping, and servicing of a jet fighter plane.
So you spent your time there, then what?
I was in that job for almost 3 years. Stayed the same place for 3 years. Other than we did take some TDY travel, which is temporary duty, to Arizona for gunnery practice for the pilots. We were in Yuma, Arizona for 4 weeks. And we had a 2-week tour in Vancouver, British Columbia with the Royal Canadian Air Force on a joint maneuver. Our mission was air defense. We had fighter interceptors that were on standby. They were on alert 24 hours a day. It was during the time when the Russians were a problem. Of course, we were in the Korean War, and they wasn't sure what Russians were going to do, and so they had this alert system set up with radar surveillance and fighter planes stationed all the way from Alaska to California, just in case they were needed for if the Russians came over. We were supposed to. And I can say that there was not a Russian that got past our air base.
All right. Never got any further.
They never got any further.
So you came back to Pleasant Lake then?
Came back to Pleasant Lake and went to work with my father in the metal shop. He had, at the meantime, had reopened the metal and tin shop at the farm. He had built a building out there and had his business there, and so I went to work with my father, worked for him, with him. Let's see, I got back to Indiana, it was sometime like January in 1955. with the intention that I was going to enroll in Tri-State University in the fall enrollment, because I was eligible for the GI Bill, which would have paid my tuition. During the summer of 1955, my father had a nervous breakdown, and he was unable to do anything. He could do nothing. He was just completely incapacitated. So I ended up having to run the business and didn't know anything about what I was doing, but I was running a business. And eventually ended up, became a partner in the business, and later on bought my father out, bought his share of the business, and owned the business.
And what was it called?
Howard Dodge and Son. And my dad was involved probably, see, that would have been in the 60s, sometime in the 1960s. He was involved for maybe 5 or 6 years, and then I bought him out and ran the business. Then eventually ended up moving it to Angola in 1985, built a new building in Angola.
And what did Howard Dodge and Son do?
We installed furnaces, air conditioners, and eave spouting. Done a lot of eave spouting, putting gutters on houses. And the furnace business at that time was transitioning from coal-fired to oil-fired. Oil-fired was becoming the new thing. Everybody was getting an oil-burning furnace, and we put in a lot of them all over the county. And about sometime along in the 70s or so, air conditioning became popular. People were buying air conditioners, and so we were in the air conditioning business, and I didn't know anything about it, but I learned. I learned by experience, I guess. And we then along came natural gas. And natural gas was a big boom, and everybody was wanting to get hooked onto natural gas as the pipelines were coming through. So we were taking out oil furnaces and putting in gas furnaces. Done a lot of them.
Business went well.
It went well, very well. And ended up then moving to Angola, and that was kind of the start of the industrial development in Angola. It was back in 1984, and bought a piece of land from Chuck Sheets, built a building, and we were the first building in that division, and then some factories started building and right down the street, and we were getting to work in those new construction jobs, which gave us a lot of work to do.
How many employees did you have?
I'm thinking maybe 5 or 6 when we went to town. When I ended up selling, I had 13 people working for me.
You were involved in the Pleasant Lions Club for a long time, as your father was before that.
Yes. Mentioned earlier about working for Cecil Lepley. Cecil Lepley was a member of the Pleasant Lake Lions Club, and he sponsored me to be a member in 1950. Now I was 20 years old in 1950, and he asked me to join the Lions Club, so I did. Then, of course, I went off to service. I was gone 4 years. But if you were serving in the military, that time all counted towards your Lions Club membership. So I was able to count my membership from 1950, but although I did not become active and involved in the club until after I got back from the service. And interesting thing about at that time, there was a cap on the membership numbers in the club at 55. That was as many members as they would allow in the club was 55. And there was a waiting list. You had to wait till somebody either left or died before you could get into the club. A little different than what it is today.
Yeah, they begging people to join.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, you were a district governor with the Lions. You became involved statewide?
Yeah. I can remember this. A man named Elmer Moucher from Fort Wayne was our district governor. And I'm working in a shop one day at the tin shop, doing some fabricating or something, and Elmer came in, and he said, how would you like to be a zone chairman? I said, I don't know. What's a zone chairman? I wasn't even sure what it was, right? So he told me what I needed to do and have to do and so forth, and I said, oh, I guess I could do that. So I did. Took the zone chairman's job, and then the next year they needed a region chairman, so I was the region chairman. And I had just finished being region chairman when it was coming up for the election of a new district governor in 1972. And there was a man that announced he was going to run for governor. And I had some other past governors that came to me and said, you're running for governor. I said, I am? Why is that? I said, well, we don't want this other guy to be governor. So I ran for governor and got elected. At a district convention in Decatur, and it was 1972, and the Pleasant Lake Lions Club chartered a bus to go to Decatur to the convention. We had a big time.
I didn't know that.
It was a contest. I mean, it was really, you had to do some campaigning. Yeah.
Now, how'd you get involved in politics?
Oh, that goes back to 1970, I guess, maybe when I might have got started on that. My uncle, Uncle Wade, was the township trustee, and he needed somebody for his advisory board. He asked me to be on his advisory board. So I ended up on the advisory board. I think it was by appointment. I'm not sure now. I don't think it was elected. It probably was a little later on or something like that. And then Tom Hanselman was the county chairman, and he asked me to be a precinct committeeman. So I became a precinct committeeman, and I did that for a few years. And then the county chairman asked me to be a treasurer on the central committee, which I did. I became the treasurer of the county central committee and was involved in that and so forth. And the county chairman moved on up to the district chairman, which left a vacancy, and the precinct committee people elected me as county chairman. So I did that for 4 years. And then I become a vacancy on the county council. Mary Ransburg, remember Mary Ransburg? Yes. Mary Ransburg was a county councilman. Mary died, the vacancy. So I've filed for a seat on the council and was selected in a caucus by the precinct committee people. Serve on the council, and did that for 12 years on county council. And during the time I was on the county council, Commissioner Dale Hughes died. So a vacancy became available on the county commission, and I filed for that and was selected to fill the vacancy. And then on the county council seat, or the commissioner seat, came up for re-election, and I filed for election on the commissioner's seat, and in the primary I had a challenger who was your neighbor. You remember him?
Yeah.
And I lost the election in the May primary on May 4th. It was kind of really weird because I thought, well, I'm all done with this now. I don't have to do any more. Tony Culver was the county chairman, Republican county chairman at the time, and he says, oh, during that time, Senator Bud Meek from Fort Wayne had died. So there was a vacancy in the Indiana State Senate. Dennis Cruz, who was our state representative, decided to go for the Senate seat, so that left a vacancy for state representative. I lost the primary election for the commissioner seat on May 4th. On May 18th, I was a state representative.
So you got into all these political offices because somebody died.
Yeah, yeah, that's about it. Really, it was weird. Kind of.
How long were you a state representative? From what years?
8.5 years.
And what do you recall most about the state legislature during your time there? What were the big events or issues you guys faced?
My first year was 2005, the first session that I was in. I came in May. Of course, the 2004 session was over with. So in 2005, Mitch Daniels became the governor. A new governor in 2005, and the Republicans took the majority in the House of Representatives, 51 to 49. First time they'd been the majority for 16 years. So all of a sudden we have a new governor. We've got Republicans are in the majority, so they have to organize and form all the committees and chairmanships and elect the speaker and all that sort of thing. That was the first year. And the first big issue that came up was the leasing of the Indiana Toll Road, which Governor Daniels had been negotiating even prior to him taking office. I guess he had been talking with people, these companies that were looking to lease it. So that was a very controversial issue. The 2005 session was a long session, which was a budget session, which meant that we had a lot of work to do to get a budget put together, let alone this toll road lease proposal, which had to be legislated. And I sent out requests for to poll the district on how people felt about the leasing, and it was like 70% of the responses were opposed to leasing the toll road. And I at first was very hesitant because I didn't think, why would you want to do that? You know, that seems like a dumb idea. Why do you want to lease the toll road? Until I finally got it fully explained, the benefits was Indiana would receive $3.8 billion in revenue and money up front from the lease company, which would fund all of Indiana Department of Highway Transportation, would fund all of their projects for the next 10 years. Well, again, then kind of sort of began to make some sense. Also, as part of the negotiation deal was that Steuben County would receive $40 million in money from the toll road lease, which is more money than Steuben County ever had, any one time. And so was able to get it passed. It was a very close vote, almost right down party line. I don't think that there was a Democrat that voted for it. It was a Republican vote that passed that legislation. That was really a very tough one. There was a lot of lobbying done, a lot of lobbying, and I can still remember it was late into the night when we finally ended up voting, and it was near the end of the session. We had to adjourn at a certain time, a certain date, so we had to do it. It passed by one vote. That was the first year. The next year was a legislation to make Indiana a right-to-work state. Another highly controversial issue. We had the state house full of labor people opposing Indiana going to a right-to-work state. But there again, the governor was very strong on that issue and able to convince enough people that it was a thing to do, and we ended up passing the legislation that made Indiana a right-to-work state.
Now, after you retired from that, you've been back, and you were always living in Pleasant Lake during that time, but you quit traveling back and forth to Indianapolis.
Yeah.
Recently, not too long ago, Governor Holcomb gave you a Sagamore the Wabash Award. Did you know you were going to get that? Was there any?
No, I did not have any idea. And I would have to credit, I guess, Representative Denny Zent for getting that done. He was responsible for getting that award, I guess.
He hasn't put me in for one yet, but I keep talking to him.
By the way, while I was state representative, I had the pleasure of presenting, or actually representing the governor on the presentation of, I think, 5 Sagamore Awards in the district, which that was really neat. That was a nice thing.
An aside from what we're doing here, but I talked to Denny Zent last week before. Anyway, he was telling me they've tried to, Holcomb wants to cut back on giving those out. He doesn't want any of them going out like they're giving them out before. Anyway, so then you've just finished up being on an honor flight.
Yes, May 23rd, went on honor flight to Washington.
How was that arranged?
Wonderful experience. It's done by application. You apply to, and then the committee, people that administer the honor flight program, award the applicants, and that happened back. I think we were notified in March that I was selected to go, and was a wonderful experience. Went on charter flight out of Fort Wayne International to Washington, D.C. We had breakfast that morning at the Air National Guard mess hall on the base there, and then boarded the plane, flew to Washington, arrived at 9:30, had 4 charter buses waiting for us to take us around to the different sites and things, and we saw a lot of memorials. Of course, World War II was the biggest issue attraction. Korean Memorial, Vietnam Memorial, Air Force has a memorial. Went to the Lincoln Memorial, and Arlington Cemetery. Saw the changing of the guard at the cemetery, which was very moving experience. Yeah. Got back to Fort Wayne at 9:30 at night, and there was at least 300 people at the terminal there to meet us when we got back. It was awesome. It's like the terminal was full of people. There was even some of them outside in a line to get out of there.
All right, well, that's all I can think of. What do you want to talk about?
Well, I guess I would just say that the good Lord has been good to me, I think, and I've had a good life, and been a wonderful place to live here. I've been around a lot of different places, and I haven't really found anything I like any better than Pleasant Lake.